The lecture hall was a cathedral of silence, the kind that pressed down on students' shoulders like cold stone. Ironbridge University, the institution's name etched into the ancient brick walls, stood proud and unyielding, but inside its lecture halls, fear reigned. Dr. Augustus Stoneheart, with his sharp gaze and clipped tone, ruled here, not with kindness but with iron-fisted authority. The air crackled with tension as the students sat frozen, pens hovering above notebooks, waiting for the inevitable. Stoneheart's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Original thought is a luxury, gentlemen and ladies, that only the privileged dare waste time on. At Ironbridge, obedience is the currency of intellect. A murmur rippled through the rows of students, all well drilled in the art of silence. No one dared to challenge the professor. Stoneheart's reputation was ironclad. His IQ boasted higher than the legends, his authority unquestioned, yet beneath his polished veneer lay a fortress built on crushing curiosity and breeding compliance. Elias, seated near the back, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes flicked toward Nora, who sat next to him, her expression guarded. Both had seen it, felt it, that creeping numbness draining their love for learning. But today, a new presence sat among them, one who would change everything. Samantha Wren entered quietly, like a whisper. Her dark hair framed a calm face, eyes steady and observant. She carried no weight of arrogance or fame, only a quiet confidence that unsettled the room. No one noticed at first. Ironbridge was a machine trained to ignore the unremarkable. Stoneheart began the lecture with his usual sneer, dissecting a complex, logical argument. Fallacy number 1, he said, pointing to the whiteboard, is assuming correlation equals causation. Basic error, but I expect even freshmen to grasp this. Then came the moment. Samantha raised a slender hand, not hesitantly, but with quiet precision. Professor Stoneheart, she said softly, voice clear and unwavering, you've conflated two distinct premises. Your example assumes causation from correlation, yes, but your dismissal of alternative explanations commits the post hoc fallacy. The room froze. The air thickened. Stoneheart's face flushed crimson. Explain yourself, he snapped, his voice sharper than before. Samantha stood, her posture impeccable. Your logic dismisses the complexity of variables at play. By excluding alternative hypotheses, you create a false dichotomy, forcing the argument into a corner that supports your authority rather than truth. Whispers swelled around the room. Elias's jaw tightened. Nora's eyes widened. Stoneheart's nostrils flared. Are you implying I am wrong? A transfer student. This is not a debate society, Ms. Wren. Facts are facts. Samantha's gaze never wavered. Facts must withstand scrutiny. Intelligence isn't a measure of volume or volume of shouting. It's precision and clarity. A beat of silence. Then Samantha dropped the final truth. My IQ is 185, she said, the number landing like a hammer. I'm not here to challenge for spectacle, but for justice. The room erupted, not with protest, but with stunned realization. The students leaned in, suddenly alive, the ice of fear beginning to melt. Stoneheart's authority, once absolute, had cracked. Samantha's words hung in the air like a quiet thunderclap. The unremarkable had spoken, the underdog had spoken. And in the shadowed halls of Ironbridge University, a slow-burning revolution had begun. The lecture hall buzzed quietly, like a storm held just beneath the surface. The cold, grey walls of Ironbridge University seemed to close in tighter than ever. Dr. Augustus Stoneheart paced before the whiteboard, a symbol of control, his fingers tapping rhythmically as if commanding the room to attention. Today, Stoneheart began, voice low but firm, we dissect the nature of logical fallacies, the cracks in flawed reasoning. Those who master logic master truth. A few students nodded obediently. Others sat tense, fearing the inevitable trap laid in his words. Among the sea of faces, Samantha Wren sat still, eyes bright but calm. The air crackled with tension. This was no ordinary lecture. This was a battleground. The students knew it. Elias and Nora exchanged glances, the kind that silently urged Samantha to speak. Stoneheart launched into his favorite weapon, the false dichotomy. Either you accept my argument, or you admit ignorance. No middle ground. Samantha's hand rose slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to draw Stoneheart's narrowing gaze. "Yes, Miss Wren?" Stoneheart's voice was sharp, a blade poised to strike. Samantha's voice broke the silence, soft but resolute. "Professor Stoneheart, your argument is an oversimplification. It forces a false dichotomy where none exists." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Stoneheart's face twitched. The usually unshakable professor was rattled. "Explain yourself," he snapped, eyes flashing. Samantha stood, the weight of the room shifting onto her slender frame. "Logic demands clarity. Your premise assumes only two choices, ignoring the spectrum of possibilities." She paced a few steps, measured and deliberate, the room hanging on every word. "By framing the argument as binary, either accept or deny, you deny complexity. You dismiss nuance. This isn't intellectual rigor. It's a cage." Elias leaned forward, heart pounding. Nora's hand clenched the notebook. Stoneheart's jaw tightened. "Miss Wren, this is academic discourse, not a philosophy club. Your objections seem less like insight and more like defiance." Samantha met his gaze steadily. "Insight and defiance are not mutually exclusive, Professor. Sometimes defiance is the path to truth." A pause. The tension was palpable. Stoneheart scoffed, but Samantha pressed on. "Allow me to demonstrate." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, opening to a page marked with precise notes. "Here, I've annotated examples where the false dichotomy fallacy distorts ethical debates, forcing impossible choices rather than presenting real options." Her voice grew firmer. "Consider this, the assumption that one must choose either complete obedience or total rebellion ignores the valid middle ground of reasoned dialogue." The room was silent. Stoneheart's usual smugness gave way to something darker. "Unease," Samantha continued, voice rising slightly but controlled. "This fallacy, this weapon of intellectual oppression, is not just a mistake in logic. It's a tool used to maintain power by silencing dissent." Her eyes scanned the room, settling on Stoneheart. "Ironbridge's tradition of obedience equals intellect is exactly that, a false dichotomy designed to suppress curiosity." Stoneheart's face flushed crimson. "You're treading dangerous ground." Samantha's calm returned. "Perhaps. But if truth is not dangerous, why is it feared?" A beat of silence. Then came the reveal, the crescendo. "My IQ is 185, Samantha stated clearly, hammering the number into the room's consciousness. "I do not say this to boast. I say it to expose your misconception that loud arrogance equals intelligence. It does not." The lecture hall held its breath. The students exchanged stunned looks. Elias's eyes widened, Nora's mouth pressed into a tight line. Stoneheart's lips curled into a sneer. "IQ is a flawed metric at best, and your arrogance exceeds your wisdom." Samantha smiled faintly, unshaken. "IQ is not the sole measure, but it underscores the point. Brilliance need not shout to be heard." She sat slowly, the storm breaking. In the room, a student whispered, "She's right." Another nodded. Quiet murmurs swelled into murmurs of approval. Stoneheart's authority, once an unyielding monolith, had begun to crumble. Elias leaned toward Nora. "Did you see that?" She didn't just challenge him, she dismantled him. Nora's eyes sparkled. Quiet strength, that's what he never understood. The professor sat down heavily at his desk, the room still humming with newfound energy. Samantha's voice broke the rising tide of whispers. "Truth stands on its own. It needs no proclamation." The students erupted, not with chaos, but with cathartic applause, the sound echoing like a rebellion. And in that moment, beneath the cold stones of Ironbridge University, a quiet genius had spoken, and the old guard's reign was cracked forever. The lecture hall at Ironbridge University was thick with silence, an oppressive, expectant hush that clung to the high ceilings and faded brick walls. Outside, autumn leaves rustled in a bitter wind. Inside, the air crackled with tension. Dr. Augustus Stoneheart stood like a colossus at the front, his figure rigid, eyes scanning the rows of students like a hawk searching for prey. His voice cut through the stillness, sharp and cold. Today's lesson, the false dichotomy. You will learn that complex ideas cannot be reduced to childish either-or choices. Logic demands precision. The students sat frozen, breaths held. None dared challenge the iron-fisted professor, none, that is, except Samantha Wren. Her small hand lifted, steady and deliberate, drawing a glare from Stoneheart that could have melted steel. "Yes, Miss Wren?" His tone was skeptical, dripping with condescension. Samantha's voice broke through the tension, soft but clear, a quiet flame igniting the room. "Professor Stoneheart, your argument itself falls prey to the very fallacy you condemn." A few eyebrows shot up. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Stoneheart's lips curled into a thin smile. "Explain yourself." Samantha rose, her posture calm but commanding. "A false dichotomy is a fallacy that limits options unfairly, forcing an either-or choice where multiple alternatives exist." She stepped closer to the lectern, pulling out her notebook with deliberate grace. "By insisting that either you accept my premise or you reject it outright, you create a binary that doesn't reflect the complexity of truth." The professor's face tightened. "Are you suggesting I simplify for the sake of argument?" "On the contrary." Samantha's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "Simplification for clarity is one thing, but your argument erects a cage, one that traps dissenters into silence or submission." The murmurs grew louder. Elias and Nora exchanged looks, their admiration barely contained. Stoneheart's voice rose, an edge of irritation piercing the lecture hall. "Ms. Wren, this is not a debate club. Your dissent borders on disrespect." "Respect," Samantha replied evenly, "is earned through integrity, not enforced through fear." The room felt like it might crack under the weight of her words. Stoneheart's cheeks flushed crimson, a rare crack in his iron mask. "You would challenge decades of scholarship with a mere student's opinion?" Samantha's calm voice sharpened. "Not opinion, reasoned critique." She flipped open her notebook, pointing to carefully marked passages. "Look here. Philosophers from Aristotle to contemporary thinkers warn against false dichotomies precisely because they obscure truth." The air in the room grew electric. Stoneheart's jaw clenched. "You wield these references like weapons, but they don't change facts." Samantha stepped forward, voice steady, eyes glowing with quiet power. "Facts remain facts, but interpretation is where your logic fails." She paused, letting her words sink deep. "By forcing a choice between obedience and ignorance, you deny the very spirit of intellectual inquiry." Stoneheart's nostrils flared. "You accuse me of tyranny. I accuse you of limiting minds," Samantha said, voice rising with quiet fire. "Of assuming arrogance is intelligence, of conflating volume with veracity." A student gasped. Softly, Samantha smiled faintly, then delivered the final blow. "My IQ is 185, not to boast but to expose your fallacy that loudness equals wisdom." The room was stunned into silence before it erupted in whispered gasps. Stoneheart's face drained of color. "IQ is no measure of true intellect," he spat. Samantha's smile never wavered. "True intellect listens. True intellect questions. True intellect knows that the quiet mind often holds the sharpest sword." The students leaned in, feeling the tide turn. Elias whispered to Nora, "Did you hear that? She didn't just speak, she shattered him." Nora nodded, eyes shining. "Quiet strength is the deadliest." Stoneheart sank into his chair, defeated, his empire of intimidation crumbling. Samantha gathered her things with unshaken grace. "Truth stands on its own," she said softly. "No need to shout." Applause rippled through the hall, swelling like a victorious storm. The old guard had fallen. The quiet genius had spoken. The old auditorium at Ironbridge University sat under a heavy grey sky, its tall windows casting long, sombre shadows on the polished wooden floor. The faint scent of rain hung in the air, mixing with the anticipation that had gathered like a storm cloud inside the lecture hall. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the towering figure at the podium, Dr. Augustus Stoneheart, the unyielding, iron-willed professor whose reputation for intellectual tyranny preceded him. The murmurs among students hushed as Stoneheart's voice sliced through the stillness. Logic is not a game of chance. It is the architecture of truth, and false dichotomies are bricks laid with carelessness. His tone was cold, authoritative, an unspoken warning that dissent would not be tolerated. In the front row, Samantha Wren sat unmoving, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable, a quiet, studious Filipina with an unassuming presence. But today, beneath the surface, a fierce resolve simmered, ready to ignite. Stoneheart's sharp eyes caught her gaze. "Ms. Wren," he said, voice laced with condescension, "have you a question or a correction?" Samantha's hand rose slowly, deliberately. The room's tension thickened, an almost tangible electricity crackled, as if the very air held its breath. "Yes, Professor," Samantha replied, voice steady and calm. "I must respectfully challenge the premise of your argument." A flicker of disbelief crossed Stoneheart's face, quickly masked by his usual smirk. "Do enlighten us," he said. Samantha stood, every movement composed and deliberate. "You argue that false dichotomies reduce complex truths to oversimplified choices, a claim I accept. Yet your own framework insists that we must either accept your rigid interpretation or dismiss the entire concept, creating exactly the binary trap you condemn." Gasps rippled through the audience. Even Stoneheart's face betrayed a flicker of irritation. "Is this not," Samantha continued, "a false dichotomy in itself?" Stoneheart's brow furrowed. "Are you suggesting that my years of scholarship hinge on flawed logic?" "I'm suggesting," Samantha said softly but firmly, "that intellectual rigor requires more than loud assertion. It demands openness to nuance." The murmur swelled into whispers. Elias and Nora, seated a few rows back, exchanged glances filled with admiration. The balance of power was shifting. Stoneheart's lips tightened into a thin line. "Ms. Wren, your youthful idealism is noted. However, scholarship is not built on sentiment but facts." Samantha's eyes locked with his. "Facts, yes, but interpretation matters. Your framework forces a false binary, either obedience or chaos, truth or ignorance. It excludes the possibility that knowledge exists beyond these extremes." Her words resonated, calm, precise, unyielding. "Logic," she said, "is not a weapon to silence dissent, but a tool to sharpen understanding." Stoneheart's face flushed crimson. The class had never seen him lose composure so visibly. "You presume to lecture me on logic?" he spat. Samantha's response was a quiet smile, unshaken by his rising anger. "Not presume, prove. My IQ is 185, a number I do not wield as a weapon, but a lens to understand complexity." The room fell into stunned silence. The figure who had towered over the academic world was momentarily exposed as vulnerable. Stoneheart's voice cracked. "IQ is but a number, not a measure of wisdom." Samantha's voice did not waver. "True wisdom listens. True wisdom questions. True wisdom knows that quiet strength cuts deeper than loud arrogance." She paused, letting her words hang like a gauntlet thrown at Stoneheart's feet. The auditorium erupted, not in chaos, but in the low roar of awakened minds. Students clapped softly at first, then with growing confidence. The tide had turned. Elias leaned to Nora, whispering. She didn't just answer. She dismantled him. Nora nodded, eyes gleaming. Quiet competence beats empty bluster every time. Stoneheart sank back in his chair, defeated in silence. His empire of fear cracked, a monument to arrogance broken by the subtle power of reason. Samantha gathered her notes, her poise unbroken. Truth does not need volume, she said softly, because it stands on its own. The applause swelled, filling the hall with the sound of victory, not just for Samantha, but for every quiet student who had ever been silenced. Today, the unremarkable had triumphed over the mighty. The immigrant had shattered prejudice with intellect. The quiet spark had ignited a revolution, and the stone, once thought unbreakable, had cracked. The lecture hall was packed beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation and the low murmur of restless students. Ironbridge University's oldest room, with its vaulted ceilings and grand oak paneling, was the perfect stage for a confrontation. Long brewing beneath the surface, at the center of attention stood Professor Malcolm Ridgway, a man known for his towering ego and cutting wit, whose reputation as an academic tyrant was whispered about in the halls like a cautionary tale. His eyes scanned the room, resting briefly on the small figure at the front, Samantha Wren. To some, she was just another quiet student, but today she carried with her a storm. The room quieted abruptly when Ridgway began, his voice sharp and deliberate. Logic, my dear students, is not a playground for sentiment. It is a precise instrument, wielded only by those with the intellect to understand it. A faint smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth as he glanced at Samantha. Miss Wren, care to challenge that? Samantha's gaze was steady, unblinking. I do, Professor, if I may. The silence stretched, thick and expectant, as she rose. Slowly, her voice calm but resolute. You speak of logic as if it is a weapon to enforce obedience, yet true logic is the foundation of freedom. Freedom to question, to explore nuance, to reject false binaries. Ridgway's expression hardened. False binaries are necessary to preserve clarity. Without them, we drown in ambiguity. Or, Samantha countered, we embrace complexity. The world is not a simple choice between black and white, truth or falsehood. It is a spectrum where logic must adapt, not dictate. The tension in the room escalated, electric, palpable. Students leaned forward, eyes wide. Elias and Nora exchanged knowing looks. The underdog was mounting her charge. Ridgway's voice grew sharper, bordering on scorn. Your argument assumes that logic is flexible, subjective even. That is the road to chaos. Not chaos, Samantha said quietly, but intellectual honesty. Her words echoed, deliberate and clear. You claim logic must be rigid, yet your framework excludes alternatives, forcing a false dichotomy, either my interpretation or ignorance. The professor's face flushed crimson, a rare crack in his armor. Are you insinuating my scholarship is flawed? I am suggesting, Samantha said, that wisdom requires humility. IQ 185 is not a boast, but a tool that reveals the depth of complexity in what you call clarity. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Ridgway blinked, momentarily unsettled by the revelation. IQ 185, Samantha repeated softly. Not to intimidate, but to illuminate. Numbers do not define wisdom, Ridgway snapped, his composure faltering. But they can expose arrogance, Samantha replied, voice unwavering. True wisdom listens. It welcomes dissent. It understands that quiet strength can shatter loud bluster. A hush fell over the hall, the silence ringing louder than any argument. Samantha paused, letting her message sink in. Logic is not a tool of exclusion, but of inclusion. To reject this is to reject progress. The tension broke as murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. Elias clapped softly, then louder. Nora's eyes shone with pride. Ridgway sank back, his facade crumbling under the weight of truth, his empire of intellectual tyranny shattered by the calm, unwavering voice of a student he underestimated. Samantha gathered her notes, her posture unshaken. Truth, she said, does not need to shout because it stands firm. The room erupted in applause, not chaotic, but profound. A public reckoning, a cathartic release of years of suppressed doubt and quiet rebellion. Elias leaned toward Nora, whispering, "She didn't just speak, she dismantled him." Nora nodded, voice hushed but fervent. "The quiet ones always." have the deepest strength. And as the applause swelled, Samantha Wren stood tall, the unremarkable student who became a legend, a beacon for those silenced by arrogance and prejudice. The professor's silence was her victory. The cracked facade of power was proof that intellect tempered by humility always triumphs. Today, the underdog had won. Today, the whispers of change became a roar. The lecture hall was drenched in the fading afternoon light, but inside, the air crackled with tension thick enough to suffocate. Professor Malcolm Ridgway's gaze sliced through the crowd, sharp as a scalpel, landing on the solitary figure who had just dared to interrupt his meticulously orchestrated lecture. Samantha Wren. The room held its breath. Ridgway's voice was a slow, venomous drawl. Miss Wren, your interruption was unexpected. Perhaps you believe your opinions carry weight beyond your station. Samantha's eyes never wavered, calm, controlled. I don't believe, Professor. I know. A murmur rippled through the students, but the professor smirked, confident he had already won this unspoken battle. Do enlighten us, then. How does a student challenge decades of scholarly consensus with mere conviction? She rose, her posture unassuming but unyielding. It's not conviction alone, but reason. Logic isn't a weapon for the elite, nor is it a rigid code to silence dissent. Ridgway's expression twitched, the first sign of discomfort. Logic is absolute. It demands binary answers, true or false, valid or invalid. There is no room for your nuance. Binary logic, Samantha replied, voice measured, is a false dichotomy. It simplifies complex truths into convenient boxes, ignoring the spectrum of reality. True logic embraces complexity. It adapts. It questions itself. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Students exchanged glances. Elias and Nora, seated nearby, leaned forward, their faces lit with anticipation. Your argument, Ridgway sneered, is a romanticized fallacy. Logic, by definition, excludes ambiguity. To introduce flexibility is to dilute its essence. Or, Samantha said, stepping closer, it is to recognize the difference between rigid thinking and intellectual honesty. Ridgway's face flushed crimson. Are you implying my teachings lack honesty? Not lacking, she said softly, but incomplete. Your framework creates an intellectual hierarchy that dismisses dissent as ignorance. That's prejudice masquerading as prejudice? His voice cracked slightly, revealing a crack in his armor. Yes, prejudice that cloaks itself in authority and silences voices like mine. But true scholarship welcomes challenges because truth grows from debate, not domination. A hush fell. The air was heavy, taut as a drawn bowstring. Miss Wren, Ridgway hissed, you claim to possess superior intellect. What proof do you offer beyond mere words? Samantha's lips curved into a quiet, confident smile. 185 IQ. The room gasped collectively. Whispers erupted. 185, she repeated, voice steady. Not to boast, but to demonstrate the capacity to see beyond your black and white world. To understand that knowledge is fluid, not fixed. Intelligence is not measured by numbers alone. Ridgway snapped, trying to regain control. But it reveals potential, Samantha countered. Potential to break free from intellectual. A tyranny, to expose fallacies disguised as dogma. The professor's eyes darted nervously. His usual swagger faltered. You speak as if you're some academic savior, Ridgway spat. But you're just a student, unremarkable, unheard. Unremarkable? Samantha's voice rose, not with anger, but with unyielding resolve. That's the label you and this institution have stamped on me because I don't fit your narrow mold. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But here's the truth. Genius doesn't always wear a loud voice. It can be quiet. It can be patient. It can wait. The hall was silent, except for the faint hum of the projector and the quickened breaths of the audience. Samantha's eyes locked with Ridgway's. Your arrogance isn't strength. It's fear. Fear of being proven wrong by someone you underestimated. Her final words landed like a hammer. Today, that's exactly what happened. The students erupted into applause, a swell of cheers that filled the hall with a sense of liberation. Elias clapped loudly, a grin breaking across his face. Nora's eyes shimmered with tears of joy. Ridgway stood frozen, the facade of dominance shattered. Samantha gathered her notes, voice soft but clear. Logic should be an instrument of justice, not judgment. It should lift voices, not silence. Them. The crowd roared again, this time in celebration, not just of Samantha's victory, but of the quiet revolution she embodied. The professor's silence was her triumph. The power dynamic had shifted. The immigrant brilliance of a Filipina student had pierced through institutional bias, and the underdog had emerged victorious. As Samantha walked from the podium, the applause followed her, a cathartic anthem for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. In that moment, the room wasn't just a lecture hall. It was a battlefield where prejudice was defeated by intellect, where quiet strength outshone loud arrogance, and where the true meaning of logic was finally understood. This was more than a lesson in philosophy. It was a testament to justice, courage, and the enduring power of a single voice against the odds. The lecture hall held its breath. The air crackled with tension, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last. Professor Ridgway leaned forward, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. "Miss Wren, your insistence on challenging established doctrine is quaint, but do you grasp the fundamental flaw in your argument?" Samantha's face remained calm, the faintest trace of a smile curving her lips. "Please, Professor, enlighten me." He straightened, voice sharp and deliberate. "Logic demands binaries, true or false, valid or invalid. Your notion of nuance, while poetic, undermines the very essence of rational thought." "Logic demands binaries?" Samantha's voice was steady, unshaken. "Is that what you teach? That reality is confined to black and white, with no room for the gray that colors every true situation?" Ridgway's face flushed crimson. "Philosophy is precise. We cannot allow ambiguity to dilute truth." "Yet," she countered, "it is your definition that dilutes truth by ignoring complexity. True logic embraces contradiction, questions itself, and evolves. Your rigid dichotomy is a false prison, a cage for intellectual growth." The professor's eyes flickered, unease creeping beneath his polished arrogance. "You speak as if you hold the key to intellectual justice. What proof have you that your approach holds merit?" Samantha inhaled slowly, the room hanging on, her every breath. "Proof?" She let the word linger. "I'll offer you something more tangible than opinion. My IQ score, 185. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Students exchanged incredulous looks. "Intelligence isn't just numbers," Ridgway sneered, "but let's indulge your point. Even with that number, how do you justify undermining the structure that supports this institution?" She took a measured step forward, voice clear and firm. "Because that structure supports not truth, but prejudice. It elevates authority over reason, silencing voices it deems unworthy. Your logic is a tool for gatekeeping, not enlightenment." Ridgway's jaw clenched. "You accuse me of prejudice? A scholar? A scholar? Or a bully hiding behind credentials? To suppress challenges?" Samantha's words cut through the room like a knife. The lecture hall was silent, the tension a taut wire ready to snap. "You underestimate the power dynamic here," Ridgway warned, voice low but threatening. "I understand it better than you think," she replied quietly. "You wield authority like a weapon, but intellect isn't about volume or rank. It's about quiet strength, the ability to stand firm in truth without shouting." A flicker of doubt crossed the professor's face. He looked away, then back, trying to salvage control. "Your arrogance will be your downfall." Samantha shook her head. "No, Professor, it's your arrogance that's the downfall of this institution." She paused, eyes sweeping across the room filled with students. "You see me as unremarkable, a mere student from an immigrant background. That's your prejudice speaking. But I am here to dismantle your false dichotomy and reveal the flawed logic you've built your empire on." The silence was electric. Samantha's voice softened, yet every word hit with undeniable force. "This isn't just about me. It's about every student labeled less than because they don't fit your narrow mold. Her gaze locked with Ridgway's one last time. Today, that changes. The room erupted in applause, a wave of cheers washing over the professor's stunned expression. Elias and Nora exchanged victorious smiles, their support unwavering. Ridgway's face paled, his dominance slipping like sand through his fingers. Samantha gathered her notes, voice steady and resolute. True logic serves justice. It does not oppress. It lifts voices, nurtures debate, and celebrates complexity. The applause swelled again, filling the space with catharsis. The professor's silence was the final verdict. The power shifted. The quiet brilliance of a Filipina student had pierced the veil of institutional bias. The unremarkable had triumphed. This was not just a victory for Samantha. It was a testament to every underdog who dares to speak truth to power. As she left the podium, the cheers followed, a celebration of courage, intellect, and the enduring power of calm competence against arrogance. The lecture hall seemed to shrink beneath the weight of the moment. The air crackled with tension, thick and electric, as Professor Ridgway fixed his gaze on Samantha Wren. His lips curled into a smirk, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Miss Wren," he began, voice low and cutting, "you continuously challenge not just my lectures, but the very foundation of our academic principles. Do you understand the danger of such defiance?" Samantha's eyes remained steady, unblinking. "I understand that your principles are not as unshakable as you believe." A faint murmur rippled through the crowd of students. Faces turned toward her, anticipation building like a slow-burning fuse. Ridgway's face flushed crimson. "Your arrogance blinds you. This institution thrives on clear distinctions, binaries, if you will. Without them, scholarship descends into chaos." "Binaries," Samantha repeated, her voice calm but resonant. "A false dichotomy. You say it's clarity, but it's exclusion. You insist on either or when life is both and. The world doesn't fit neatly into your boxes." "Philosophy demands precision, Miss Wren," Ridgway snapped, "not your nebulous grey areas." "But that precision," she countered, stepping forward, "is your excuse to silence complexity, to mask prejudice as order." The professor's jaw tightened. "What proof do you have that your approach holds merit beyond idealistic rhetoric?" Samantha smiled faintly, the room hanging on her every word. "Proof?" She let the word echo. "Let's start with the facts. My IQ is 185. Gasps erupted from the students, eyes widening in disbelief. "Intelligence isn't a number, Professor," she said quietly, "but here it is, undeniable. And yet you dismiss me because I don't fit your idea of who deserves to speak." Ridgway's smirk faltered. "Your numbers don't grant you the right to undermine established authority." "Authority," Samantha repeated, "is not synonymous with truth, and your authority is built on silencing voices like mine, voices that challenge, that question. Careful," Ridgway warned, "or your insubordination will cost you dearly." "I'm not afraid of consequences," Samantha replied softly, her voice steady, "because truth isn't loud or aggressive, it's quiet strength, the strength to stand firm when faced with bullying." The room held its breath. Samantha's gaze swept across her classmates, some wide-eyed, some nodding subtly. "You see me as unremarkable," she said, "an immigrant student from a faraway place. That's your bias speaking. But here's the truth. Intelligence and brilliance don't come from pedigree or place. They come from perseverance, from quiet competence." Ridgway's face drained of color. His confident veneer cracked, revealing uncertainty. "You mistake confidence for arrogance," Samantha said. "But arrogance is loud. It is fragile. Quiet strength is resilient. It doesn't need to shout to be heard." A deep silence fell over the room. Then, as if released from damn, applause swelled. Cheers echoed, reverberating off the walls. Students rose, clapping, voices lifted in celebration. Ridgway stood frozen, the weight of public humiliation crushing the authority he once wielded like a sword. Elias and Nora exchanged victorious smiles in the crowd, their pride evident. Samantha gathered her notes, voice steady and authoritative. True logic serves justice. It embraces nuance, it listens, it evolves. The applause grew louder, filling the space with catharsis and relief. In that moment the power dynamic shifted. The unremarkable had humbled the arrogant. The immigrant had shattered prejudice. The quiet brilliance had silenced the bully. As Samantha stepped down from the podium, the crowd's cheers followed her like a wave, a testament to courage, intellect, and the triumph of calm competence over loud arrogance. This was more than a victory. It was a lesson in intellectual justice and human dignity, and it was just the beginning. The lecture hall was a cauldron of anticipation. The air crackled with tension, a charged silence before the storm. Professor Ridgway's eyes bore into Samantha Wren, his voice laced with condescension. "Miss Wren," he began, "your persistent challenges border on insubordination. Are you aware of the consequences?" Samantha met his gaze unflinchingly. "I am aware that truth often comes at a cost." A ripple ran through the students, their attention riveted. Ridgway's smirk twitched but held. "You claim to challenge the foundation of our academic principles, yet offer nothing but idealistic rhetoric." "On the contrary," Samantha said steadily, "I'm here to expose the false dichotomies you insist on. You speak of clarity through binaries, right or wrong, superior or inferior, but life rarely fits into such neat boxes." He scoffed. "Philosophy demands precision, not ambiguity. Precision is meaningless if it masks prejudice," she countered. "Your clarity is an excuse to exclude complexity, to silence voices that don't fit your narrow view." Ridgway's face flushed crimson, but he pressed on. "What evidence supports your claims beyond rebellious sentiment?" Samantha's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "Evidence? My IQ is 185. Gasps exploded around the room. The notion seemed impossible to some. Samantha let the words sink in. "Intelligence isn't a number," she continued calmly, "but it does expose your flawed assumptions. You dismiss me because I don't conform to your expectations, a Filipina immigrant, unremarkable. By your biased standards," his smirk faltered, "numbers don't grant you license to disrespect authority." "Authority is not truth," Samantha said softly but firmly, "and your authority is built on fear. Fear of challenge, of nuance. Its loud, brittle arrogance masquerading as control." The air grew heavier. Samantha's voice dropped to a measured calm. "I represent quiet strength, resilience that doesn't shout but stands firm. I reject your false binary of loud arrogance versus silent submission." The professor's jaw tightened. "You're treading dangerous ground." "Dangerous. Truths are still truths," she replied. "You wield your power to maintain a hierarchy, to uphold prejudice under the guise of logic. But logic demands fairness, openness to complexity, not narrow, exclusionary thinking." A tense silence stretched. Then slowly, the audience began to applaud. One student started, and the applause spread like wildfire, a wave of approval that filled the room. Ridgway stood, stunned, his authoritative mask cracking under the weight of public rebuke. Samantha gathered her notes, voice clear and steady. "Intellectual justice isn't about dominance. It's about equity, fairness, and embracing nuance." The applause swelled louder. Samantha's classmates, once silent, now cheered openly. Elias and Nora exchanged proud glances. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted irreversibly. The unremarkable student had humbled the arrogant professor. The immigrant had shattered the walls of prejudice. The quiet brilliance had triumphed over loud tyranny. Samantha stepped down, the cheers following her like thunder. This wasn't just victory, it was catharsis, a testament to the strength of calm competence over bluster, a lesson in humility and justice, delivered not with fists, but with words. And as the crowd's applause echoed, Samantha knew this was only the beginning. The grand lecture hall hummed with barely contained tension. Samantha Wren sat poised at the center, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the polished podium. Around her, the students leaned forward, breaths held, as Professor Ridgway's piercing glare settled on her like a physical weight. "Miss Wren," Ridgway began, his tone sharp and clipped, "your continued defiance disrupts the sanctity of this institution. Do you truly believe your objections merit such attention?" The room fell silent, the air crackling with tension thick enough to taste. Samantha's eyes locked onto his, unwavering and calm. "I don't believe, Professor, I know, and I think it's time someone spoke truth to power." A murmur swept, and through the audience, Ridgway's lips twitched into a contemptuous smirk, but his face flushed crimson, a rare crack in his armor. "Truth?" he echoed, voice rising. "You wield that word like a weapon, but your truth is nothing more than immature idealism." "Immature?" Samantha's voice was quiet but resolute, drawing in the room's focus. "Or is it the courage to question your outdated dogma?" The professor's eyes narrowed. "Dogma preserves order. Your so-called questions threaten it. This university thrives on clear lines, right and wrong, superior and inferior." Samantha's gaze sharpened. "But those lines aren't clear, are they? They're drawn to exclude, to silence complexity, to maintain power." Ridgway's posture stiffened, a hand gripping the edge of his desk as if to anchor himself. "Philosophy demands precision, young lady, not the muddled grey areas you champion." She leaned forward slightly, voice steady and commanding. "Precision is useless if it blinds us to injustice. Your precision is a tool to uphold prejudice. You reduce intellect to numbers, categories, stereotypes." The crowd stirred, eyes widening. Samantha pressed on. "I'm Filipina. I don't fit your preconceived notions of brilliance, but my IQ is 185. I am not unremarkable. I am evidence that your biased logic is flawed." For a moment, Ridgway was speechless, his red face betraying the turmoil behind his professional facade. "Numbers don't grant you license to disrespect authority," he finally snapped. "Authority does not guarantee truth," Samantha countered, calmly. "Your authority is built on fear. Fear of being challenged, fear of nuance. You confuse volume for strength, arrogance for wisdom." The hall was electric, breaths caught, hearts pounding. Samantha's voice softened, but carried undeniable. "Wait, I embody quiet strength, not the loud, brittle arrogance you mistake for power. I stand firm in competence and conviction, not bluster." Ridgway's jaw clenched. "You're walking a dangerous line." "Truth is always dangerous to those clinging to lies," she replied. A pregnant silence stretched, then slowly a ripple of applause began. One student clapped, then another, until the room erupted in cheers. Ridgway stood stunned and vulnerable, his dominance shattered before an audience that no longer feared him. Samantha gathered her notes with serene dignity. "Intellectual justice means fairness, equity, and embracing complexity, not imposing false binaries that serve only to exclude." The cheers grew louder, a cathartic roar that swept away the last vestiges of intimidation. Elias and Nora exchanged proud, relieved glances. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The unremarkable student had humiliated the arrogant professor. The immigrant had exposed institutional prejudice. The quiet brilliance had silenced the loud bully, and in that thunderous applause lay more than victory. It was a call for change, a demand for respect, and a lesson in humility delivered not through force but words. Samantha stepped down from the podium, the crowd's energy lifting her like a tide. This was not just a moment of personal triumph. It was a beacon for every unheard voice, a testament to the power of calm competence over blustering tyranny. And as the echoes of applause faded, Samantha knew her journey was just beginning, because true justice never rests, and neither would she. The lecture hall's atmosphere was thick, the air crackling with tension, as Professor Ridgway stood before Samantha Wren, his eyes cold and unyielding. Every student in the room felt the weight of his authority, but none more than Samantha, who sat calm and composed, her gaze steady and unflinching. Ridgway's voice sliced through the silence. Miss Wren, your persistent challenges border on insubordination. Do you truly believe your so-called arguments hold any merit? The room held its breath. Samantha's reply was quiet but firm. Professor, I don't believe. I know. Her words hung in the air, heavier than any lecture note. No? Ridgway scoffed, his face flushing a deep crimson, the first crack in his arrogance. And what do you know that the rest of us do not? That your rigid insistence on binary. Thinking blinds you, Samantha answered, voice clear and unwavering. You insist the world divides neatly into winners and losers, right and wrong, genius and mediocrity. But it doesn't, not in real life. A ripple of surprise passed through the students. Ridgway's jaw tightened. Your false dichotomy, Samantha continued, is a convenient cage, one that excludes complexity and nuance in favor of control. Control, Ridgway shot back. Control maintains standards. Without it, chaos reigns. Samantha's eyes flickered with quiet strength. Standards are necessary, but when standards become dogma, they stifle growth. You equate loud arrogance with competence, but they're worlds apart. The professor's hand clenched the lectern. And what would you suggest? That I lower the bar for those who do not meet your impossible standards? No, Samantha said softly. I suggest you reconsider what the bar is and who decides. Where it stands. Her words were a challenge, wrapped in calm authority. The crowd leaned in. You see, Professor, she added, I am Filipina. Many expect me to be silent, unremarkable, but my intellect, my achievements, defy your stereotypes. The truth is, intelligence is not a fixed scale measured by your narrow definitions. It's fluid, multifaceted, and cannot be boxed into your limited categories. Ridgway's face burned red with humiliation, the room sensing the shift. You mistake volume for strength, Samantha said, her voice growing firmer. Your loud denials of my points betray insecurity, not authority. He snapped. You tread a dangerous line, young woman. I tread the line of truth, she answered, steady as stone. And I do so not to confront you with noise, but with reasoned conviction. The silence that followed was profound. No one dared interrupt. Samantha's words had pierced the veil of prejudice. She looked around the hall, eyes meeting the expectant faces of her peers. This is not just about me. It's about dismantling flawed logic that masquerades as wisdom. It's about recognizing quiet strength, competence, without the need for bluster. Her voice softened, but did not lose power. Intellectual justice is fairness. It is recognizing brilliance wherever it exists, not just where tradition allows it. Ridgway's composure shattered. You're arrogant. Samantha smiled faintly. No, Professor, I am confident. And today that confidence has exposed the cracks in your visage. A single clap broke the silence, then another. Soon the entire room erupted in applause, a cathartic release of tension and triumph. Ridgway stood, defeated and exposed, as the underdog, once overlooked and underestimated, stood tall and unbowed. Samantha's quiet brilliance had silenced the loud bully. The public humiliation was not cruelty, it was justice. And as the applause echoed, Samantha felt not just victory for herself, but for every voice stifled by prejudice, every mind dismissed by flawed logic. This was more than a moment. It was a movement, and it began here, with a calm voice speaking truth in a storm of arrogance. The room was heavy with anticipation, the murmur of whispered doubts and secret hopes weaving through the crowd. Samantha Wren stood at the center of this academic arena, where walls bore the weight of centuries-old tradition, and the sharp eyes of Professor Ridgway bore down like storm clouds. The air crackled with tension, an invisible current vibrating between them. Ridgway's voice cut through the silence, low and commanding. Miss Wren, once again you challenge what has been settled for decades. Do you believe your unproven theories hold any value in this discipline? Samantha's gaze was steady, unwavering. I don't believe, Professor, I know. A hush fell. Ridgway's face flushed crimson, anger flickering behind his eyes. No? What exactly do you know that the rest of us don't? Her voice dropped, calm but cutting. I know that knowledge isn't a ladder climbed only by the privileged few you deem worthy. It's a river, flowing, changing, and accessible to those willing to navigate it with open minds. A faint stir ran through the audience. Ridgway's posture stiffened, his fingers tightening around the lectern. You mistake authority. For wisdom, Samantha continued, her tone measured but resolute. You wield tradition like a weapon, enforcing a false dichotomy, where you're the gatekeeper and anyone outside your narrow parameters is dismissed. Ridgway's lip curled. This dichotomy preserves standards. Without it, scholarship collapses into chaos. Samantha's eyes shone with quiet strength. Standards should elevate, not exclude. You mistake loud arrogance for competence, but true intellect needs no bluster. It speaks through clarity and reason. The tension grew thicker, palpable like static before a storm. The room leaned in, the spectacle unfolding like a chess match. Ridgway scoffed, and what would you have me do? Lower the bar for those who don't measure up to your inclusive ideals. Her smile was faint, knowing. Not lower the bar, Professor. Rethink the bar. Who sets it and why? Who decides who is worthy and who isn't? She paused, eyes scanning the room, connecting with every student who had ever been dismissed, ignored, underestimated. I am Filipina. To many, that label means invisible, unremarkable, but I defy that stereotype. My intellect, my hard work, my persistence, they speak louder than your prejudice. Ridgway's face burned a deeper shade of red, his control slipping. You confuse confidence with arrogance, he spat. No, Samantha replied softly. I am confident because I have faced your kind of prejudice before. I have learned that quiet strength outlasts loud bluster. The room was still. The students could feel the shifting power dynamic. The professor, once a towering figure, was now vulnerable. You stand on shaky ground, Ridgway warned. I stand on truth, she said, voice steady as stone. Her words struck home, exposing the cracks in Ridgway's facade. This isn't just about me, she added. It's about dismantling a flawed system, one that forces complex ideas into simplistic boxes. You paint intelligence as a fixed scale, genius or mediocrity, but real brilliance defies such labels. A single clap echoed, then another. Slowly, applause rippled through the room, swelling to a roar. Ridgway stared, defeated, as the underdog, once silent, unseen, stood victorious. Samantha's quiet brilliance had pierced through prejudice. The catharsis was palpable. Justice served not by force, but by clarity and calm. In that moment, the room transformed. The old order faltered, making way for a new understanding, one where intellect flourished beyond boundaries, where voices long suppressed finally rang clear. And Samantha, the unassuming Filipina student, had become a beacon, not through shouting, but through the power of reasoned truth. The crowd's cheers were not mere celebration. They were a collective exhale, a release of long-held frustrations. The bully was humbled. The silent triumph was complete. The lesson was clear. Quiet strength and intellectual justice will always overcome arrogance and prejudice.